was drawing to an end in St. Petersburg, the capital of Russia under the Tsars. The large hall in the School of Law was filled with students. They listened intently to the professor. Peter Ilyitch Tchaikovsky leaned his elbows on his desk and stared straight before him. He tried to concentrate on what the professor was saying, but his thoughts drifted far away. Lovely sounds floated through his head. He wished he were studying music instead of law. Peter's father and grandfather had been officials in the Tsar's government, and he was expected to carry on the family tradition. Upon his graduation from the School of Law, he became a clerk in the Ministry of Justice. But his work did not interest him. He still dreamed of becoming a composer. One afternoon, Peter was given an important document to put on file. Instead of doing so, he kept listening to a beautiful melody that he heard in his head. He absent-mindedly tore off little pieces of the document and rolled them between his fingers. Suddenly, he heard a voice cry, "Peter, what on earth are you doing?" He awoke from his daydream and looked down at the mutilated document. Peter realized that a career in the Ministry of Justice was not for him. That night, Peter gathered up his courage. "Father," he said, "I've something to tell you. I've decided to resign from my position at the ministry and to devote myself to music." Peter's father looked at him in astonishment. "My boy, do you realize what you're doing? You've an honorable career ahead of you in the service of the Tsar. Yet you want to give it up for a musician's life, which is so beset with hardships?" "Father, I'll never be happy doing anything else." "But have you considered that most musicians begin their training when they're children? You've lost so many years studying law." "I know. But I'll work all the harder. You'll see, I'll become a good musician." There was a long silence. Finally, his father said gently, "My son, I shall not try to dissuade you from the thing you love. May you prosper in your new course." The Conservatory of St. Petersburg had just opened under the direction of the famous pianist Anton Rubinstein. Peter entered the school and threw himself into his studies. He worked so diligently that he soon made up for his late start. He finished the course in 3 years and graduated with a silver medal. At this time, there was founded the Conservatory of Moscow. Its director was Nicholas Rubinstein, the brother of Anton. One day, shortly after his graduation, Peter was summoned by Anton Rubinstein. "Young man, how would you like to go to Moscow? My brother has written me that he needs a professor of harmony for his school. I've decided to recommend you." "Oh, thank you, sir." Peter went to Moscow and took up his duties as professor of harmony at the conservatory. It was not easy for Peter to compose during his first years in Moscow. His duties at the conservatory took up most of his time. He wrote chiefly at night, after the long day of teaching. In spite of this, he produced in Moscow the first composition that bears the full mark of his genius, the overture fantasy, Romeo and Juliet, which he composed under the spell of Shakespeare's immortal play. The introduction, an andante, suggests the good Friar Lawrence, who tries to help the ill-fated lovers. Gentle harmonies, played by 2 clarinets and 2 bassoons, unfold a chorale that creates a faraway, church-like atmosphere. The Allegro opens with a stormy theme symbolizing the feud between the 2 noble families of Verona, the Montagues and Capulets. Explosive rhythm and a full orchestral tone suggest violent action. The love theme of Romeo and Juliet is a tender melody sung. It is marked, soft, sweet, and expressive. A dreamlike passage on the muted strings rounds off the opening section of the overture. The themes are developed in a section that builds up tension. The love music is expanded and rises in wave after wave of sumptuous sound to a great climax. The coda serves as an epilogue after the death of the lovers. The love theme is heard against the beat of muffled drums like a lament. The church-like atmosphere returns at the very end, as though the good friar were pronouncing a parting benediction upon the dead lovers. As time passed, Peter became more and more dissatisfied with his duties at the conservatory. How could he compose when he had to devote most of his time to teaching? He dreamed of giving up his job at the conservatory. Yet, how would he make a living if he did? At this point, there entered his life, like a fairy godmother, one of the wealthiest women in Russia, Madame von Meck, who loved Peter's music. When she heard that he needed assistance, she decided to give him an annual pension, which would free him from everything that interfered with his art. Madame von Meck, like Peter, was an extremely shy person. She lived like a recluse in her palace in Moscow. She wanted to be sure that when she helped Peter, she was interested only in the musician, not in the man. And so she made one stipulation, that Peter and she were never to meet. And thus began one of the strangest friendships in the history of music. They never once spoke to each other in person, but they poured out their feelings for each other in an extraordinary series of letters. Peter resigned his professorship at the conservatory and threw himself heart and soul into composing. In gratitude for her help, he dedicated to Madame von Meck his fourth symphony, which in his letters to her he called Our Symphony. Across the score he wrote, "To my best friend." In the Fourth Symphony, we find the tender melodies, rich harmonies, and exciting rhythms, the brilliant orchestration, the intense emotion and drama that became the marks of Peter Ilyitch Tchaikovsky's style. Madame von Meck's generosity made it possible for Tchaikovsky to travel through Europe. Of all the countries he visited, he loved Italy best. He recorded his impressions of that sunny land in his colorful Italian Caprice. Much as he enjoyed foreign scenes, Tchaikovsky loved his own country best of all. "I am a Russian through and through," he said of himself. In his Overture 1812, he gave eloquent expression to his feelings as a nationalist composer. The piece celebrates one of the most important dates in Russian history, the year of Napoleon's invasion and subsequent retreat. The overture opens with the strings playing a chorale, like a prayer in time of need. The music gives a sense of mounting tension, as if a catastrophe were drawing closer. The wind instruments play a military theme that is associated throughout the piece with the Russian army. Now the string instruments, rushing along the scale in a manner typical of Tchaikovsky, introduce a theme of strife. It is marked by abrupt rhythms and sharp accents. The theme of the French army is based on the opening notes of the Marseillaise, played first by the horns, then by other brass instruments. The violins and violas play a lyric theme of sorrow for the sufferings of the homeland. A folk dance played by flute and English horn symbolizes the masses who will rise up in defense of their country. These themes are developed and presented in new patterns. A long transitional passage ends with a great ritardando. Now the chorale returns fortissimo, while the bells of Moscow ring out joyously. The overture ends on a note of triumph with the booming of cannon and the national anthem of Tsarist Russia. In 1891, Tchaikovsky was invited to come to the United States to take part in the ceremonies that marked the opening of Carnegie Hall. He wrote home from New York, "These Americans strike me as very remarkable. In this country, the honesty, sincerity, generosity, cordiality, and readiness to help you are extremely pleasant." He went on to say, "The houses downtown are simply colossal. I cannot understand how anyone can live on the 13th floor. I felt quite giddy when I looked down on Broadway." It seemed to him that he was much more appreciated in this country than in Europe. Shortly after his return home, Tchaikovsky completed the score for his ballet, The Nutcracker. In the first number, which he called a miniature overture, Tchaikovsky wished to give an effect of lightness and grace. He therefore omitted all the bass instruments, such as the cellos and double basses, trombones and tuba, also the trumpet. The dainty effect is enhanced by the use of staccato notes. The ballet opens with a party on Christmas Eve. The guests enter to the strains of a festive march. Like so many marches, this one is in 4/4 time. At the party, a little girl receives as her Christmas gift a homely nutcracker. After the guests have departed, she falls asleep before the Christmas tree and dreams that the nutcracker has been transformed into a handsome prince. What exciting adventures they have before they meet the kind sugar-plum fairy. To portray this graceful creature, Tchaikovsky used an instrument that had just been invented, the celesta, which looked like a miniature piano. He was enchanted by its delicate, silvery tone. The dance of the sugar-plum fairy opens with 4 bars of introduction in which the strings play pizzicato. At the castle of the sugar-plum fairy, the little girl and her prince are entertained by a series of dances. The exciting trepak, or Russian dance, is marked molto vivace, very lively. It is in 2/4 time, and the heavy accents suggest the vigorous movements of a peasant dance. The Dance of the Toy Flutes, which is in a moderate tempo, presents one of Tchaikovsky's loveliest melodies, played by 3 flutes. Finally, the graceful Waltz of the Flowers. The introduction contains a cadenza for the harp, based on the broken chords or arpeggios which the harp loves to play. The waltz itself is, of course, in 3/4 time. You can almost see the ballerinas in their costumes of white lace twirling about the stage. In one of his letters to Madame von Meck, Tchaikovsky wrote, "Music is indeed the loveliest of all heaven's gifts to mankind. It is a true refuge and comforter. His own music has brought joy and comfort to millions. For this reason, Peter Ilyitch Tchaikovsky is one of the best-loved composers throughout the whole world."